Colorado Springs.
Nearly 500,000 people.
Olympic City, USA.
Garden of the Gods.
Pikes Peak.
It's a growing city.
Our local government has a lot of employees. What exactly do they do?
How does it impact my life?
This is where you find out.
Behind the Springs, an inside look at your local government.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this special episode of Behind the Springs. This is an in-depth look at your local government. Some of you may be listening during our Facebook Live event, and others may be listening as they usually do on the podcast platforms. We welcome you all to this important conversation about the local response to COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Ted Skroback with City Council Communications, and alongside of me,
Jen Schrader. I'm with City Communications, and we know folks have a lot of questions. We're going to try to address as many as we can with our guest, Mayor John Suthers. And Mayor, we want to thank you for taking the time with us today.
Glad to be with you.
And although this is a very serious topic, and like I said, very serious issue, I want to start on a lighter, more positive note and talk briefly just about the way our community has responded to this emergency so far. Many ways have been very positive and sort of what you've witnessed.
I think there is a lot of positive news in that respect. All indications are that we have had widespread compliance with the governor's stay-at-home order, and that the community in general has been very attentive to the health, safety, and issues involved with COVID-19. And let me just give you some very up-to-date numbers that I think exemplify that. Just under 11,000 people as of yesterday had tested positive in the state of Colorado for COVID-19. El Paso County, which is about 12.5% of the population, only 7% of the positive tests have come from El Paso County. And you could say, oh, well, maybe that's just a function that we're under-tested, if you will. Well, one thing I can assure you is that as time has gone by, we have had, we're doing probably citywide as many as 1,000 tests a day. But here's a few things that, you can't explain other than we've got widespread compliance. There's over 500 deaths, unfortunately, in the state of Colorado, 508. 54 of them as of yesterday have been in El Paso County. That's 10.5% of the population. We started out with a disproportionate number of deaths because even before there was a stay-at-home order, we had some infections in a bridge club here in Colorado Springs and in a nursing home. And since the time of the stay-at-home order, we have gradually become less and less and less a proportion of the deaths in Colorado, and it's going down every day, and now we're below our proportionate share. But here's the best news, and it's really, in many ways, the most important news. Our goal is we know we're going to get more people testing positive for COVID, and unfortunately, we know that additional people are going to die, particularly in these vulnerable age groups and with pre-existing conditions. What we have to make sure, and what this whole thing is about, stay-at-home orders, is making sure that our healthcare system can manage the burdens. And so that anybody who does get sick, who needs to go to the hospital, can not only go to the hospital, but get the treatment they need, whether it be a ventilator or whatever. And that's the whole focus. And as of this morning, there are 26 people in hospitals in Colorado Springs that were COVID positive. There's a little over 1,000 or 1,000 to 1,100 people statewide hospitalized with COVID. So although we're 12.5% of the population, we're 2.5% to 3% of the people that are hospitalized. That's really good news. That's an indication to me that our citizens have taken it very seriously, that we are ready to move on to phase 2, safer at home, as the governor calls it, and that we can expect, hopefully, widespread compliance with the requirements of this next phase, and hopefully not have a relapse and continue to move forward in progress towards a full reopening of our community.
Well, and the progress that we're about to take is going into phase 2, as you were just discussing. What does that phase 2 safer at home look like for Colorado Springs residents?
Well, let's just talk about a couple things. I think one important aspect of it is that for are elderly and because of pre-existing conditions, portion of our community that's very vulnerable, we hope that it will look a lot like phase one. In other words, will not under order, they will stay at home, continue to basically quarantine themselves. And of course, I think we all understand enough about this disease at this point in time to understand why that's important. Here's the problem. It's a highly contagious disease, but 80 to 85% of the people that get it won't be symptomatic. They won't even know they had it. And obviously, that's going to be particularly true among our young people. So we've got young people who have it, don't know they have it, and but if they're exposed to these older folks, whether it be at a grocery store, whether it be their grandkid coming over, whatever, they may be among that group that needs to be hospitalized and unfortunately could have the consequence of death. So for them, it's going to be much the same. Obviously, quarantines are going to be very much in order in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Now, in retail, things are opening up. As of April 27th, next Monday, any retail that wasn't doing curbside, and our health department had already allowed retail other than just restaurants to do some curbside sale in addition to online sale. But any retail can do curbside sale and online sales the 27th. A couple days later, on May 1st, they can open up for retail. Now, the conditions are they have to take steps, as lots of businesses that were deemed essential and were open, to mitigate dangers of transmission by distancing and imposing distancing, putting marks on the floor for people standing in line, making sure there's not too many people in the waiting area, that people
like you see at the grocery store if you've been out.
Exactly.
Right.
That they can achieve 6-foot distancing. And they're encouraged to not only require all their employees to wear masks, but to require customers to wear masks. And I think that's pretty important. And then, of course, we move into commercial offices reopen on May 4th that weren't previously deemed essential, with the caveat that they can bring that back at any one time, have 50% of their employees in. And I think you'll see some creativity in staggering some shifts. I think most companies, including, by the way, the city of Colorado Springs, will allow a lot of the people that are working from home to continue to work from home for some period of time after May 4th. And, of course, they'll be encouraged, distancing, wearing masks in the workplace, things like that. Medical and dental offices will open. Hospitals will once again resume elective surgery, of course, which is very important for them from a financial perspective.
Well, with more precautions in place,
Yeah.
of course, too. Right.
Yeah. Now, some things will remain the same. Restaurants will not open for in-restaurant service, at least for another couple of weeks. We'll continue to monitor. The governor says if numbers continue to improve, maybe mid-May. If it takes a little longer, maybe June 1st. Things like gyms. You can go to a personal trainer, you can go to a hair salon, you can go to a barbershop. You can't go to one of these really busy gyms. And I believe, I'm waiting for clarification on this, playgrounds will also be closed. But, of course, all our parks and trails will be open. Just to kind of sum it up, I think in phase 2, in my personal opinion, we're going to even need a little more self-discipline and more voluntary compliance than we did in phase 1. You know, it's kind of easy to stay at home if there's no place to go. Now you're going to have at least more places to go. And when you go to those places, we're going to have to make sure that the businesses and the customers are imposing self-discipline on themselves to social distance and to wear masks, wash hands, do everything else that's going to mitigate this.
And it comes back to really that voluntary compliance because, as you talked before when stay-at-home order went into place and people want to know how are you going to enforce this, and the bottom line is you can't completely enforce it. We don't have the resources to do that. So it's really up to the public to continue to do
Absolutely.
this in good faith.
We do not want to create martial law state in this thing. We want voluntary compliance. We've got some park rangers patrolling our parks. We've got some police officers in our parks that would otherwise be in our schools, but they're closed, reminding people about social distancing and things like that. If, in fact, and it was the case in Phase 1, if somebody was open that we did not think should be open, what happened was the health department issued a written letter to them, and luckily we got compliance at that point. If that had not occurred, then that could be elevated by the district attorney to a complaint. But I just don't think that has to happen.
Given everything that's going on, and as we enter this second phase, I know more questions will come up about this, but what do you see as kind of the local economic forecast as we move forward? And if you could explain, too, about how more data will be coming in soon about that.
Well, this is what's got me awake at night because Colorado Springs, just like every other city in this country, every state in this country, is going to suffer a serious economic downturn. The question is, how long is it going to be? How deep is it going to be? Here's what we know. We are a community that's very heavily dependent on sales tax. It's complicated. The bottom line is we've got constitutional provisions in the state of Colorado that are very friendly to residential taxpayers. So our residential property tax is very low. It's only 7% of our revenue. So we are, most cities, probably the average would be about 40%. So we are very dependent on sales tax. And of course, that's what's really going to be devastated by all these closed businesses, closed restaurants, things like that. We don't know. We know we lost, things started turning strange about the 10th or 11th of March. So we had 10 days of normalcy, 21 days of abnormalcy. We won't know what the extent of that damage is until the first week in May, when all the businesses that collected the tax in February paid it to the city in March. And then we won't know April, which is going to be really, really bad because that whole month has basically been shut down. We won't know that till the first week in June. Now, we've got some pretty good indications. The one indicia that just came out yesterday was hotel-motel occupancy for the month of March. The other one was airport travel. We had the lowest airport travel in 25 years. We had, I think, the lowest hotel-motel occupancy in March in 30 years or something like that. And so we know it's going to be bad. So we have to, what we're doing as a city, unlike the federal government, we don't get to spend money we don't have. We have to balance the budget by state and city law. And so there's no choice about that. We have done some immediate things, imposed a hiring freeze, and you say, well, what does that accomplish? We have 105 less employees today than we did towards the end of last year. So in a large employer, it means something. We've put off a lot of capital expenditures, including some major improvements to the police department, some of our rec centers, things like that, including some ADA capital improvements that we aren't legally required to do. We have deferred some major purchases. We've obviously got a travel ban, which is nobody's traveling anyway. And then we've gone to the departments and sat down with each one of them and told us what our expectations are. Bottom line, we've already cut about $22 million from our budget out of $330 general fund budget. That's probably it's almost certainly not going to be enough. So the next stage would be something you have to start dealing with the fact that 80% of your cost is personnel. So the next stage is okay. How do you deal with that? Probably the least painful, most shared sacrifice thing to do is across the board pay cut, which we may institute in June or July. And then we will monitor each month. How bad is it? Is it getting worse? And even with that pay cut, When we get towards the end of the year, do we need to have a furlough or the Christmas holidays or something, where people get benefits and things like that? They don't get laid off, but they don't get paid. It's basically a vacation without pay. And then the other thing is, we're perfectly. This is a emergency. This is what a reserve fund is for, and the city, under proper accounting principles, has built a reserve fund, and we're going to dip into that to what we consider an appropriate extent. You're obviously not going to expend the whole reserve fund, because we could have another COVID crisis. We could have fires, floods, whatever. But this is certainly something that merits dipping into the fund. But how much we have to do of each of these things is really dependent upon how these numbers go in. So Sharee McDaniel, the chief financial officer, she doesn't get much sleep either. She's doing all these modeling and all these trigger point scenarios. Oh, hey, we're now, we know we're going to have at least this much revenue loss. We're going to have this much revenue loss. And then these various things will kick in. So that remains to be seen, exactly what that will look like. The other unknown, here's what's happened in Congress. In the first CARES Act Phase 3, there was an appropriation of $150 billion, which, by the way, is a lot of money, to states and local governments for reimbursement of COVID-related expenses. Kind of a weird way they set it up. The states get at least $1.25 billion, and then they get a more of an appropriation based on their population. Colorado's total appropriation is $2.23 billion. But every city or county within a state that has over 500,000 in population is able to go directly to the Treasury for their proportional allotment, and that comes out of the state's allotment. Now, as luck would have it, there are, I think, 36 cities in America that have over 500,000 people. Colorado Springs is the 39th largest city in America that has 485,000 people. Unfortunately, I couldn't drum up 15,000 people on the day in question. And so we did not get a direct allotment. El Paso County, because it contains Colorado Springs, does have 500,000. They got a direct allotment, which they will receive tomorrow. Don't know exactly what it is, but it will probably be in the vicinity of $100 million or more. So El Paso County and any municipalities in El Paso County will have to go to El Paso County to get reimbursement of COVID-related expenses. But the directions from the Treasury are very clear. That cannot be a reimbursement of revenue shortfalls, tax shortfalls. It's going to have to be personal protection equipment that we've purchased. It's you'll notice that we've got folks putting in plexiglass. We're going to
Cleaning
have
supplies.
We're going to have thermometers that we're going to take people's temperature when they come all back to work and all that kind of stuff. That will all be reimbursed. There's some. I personally believe, to the extent that we have some non-taxpayer funded aspects of city government that are in essence businesses, things like America's Mountain, which is a tourist attraction, parking, enterprise, things like that. I think they're suffering a COVID-related loss that we may be able to get reimbursed for. We'll see. But those sorts of reimbursements will pale in comparison to what our revenue losses are. But Congress, they had a big debate whether to include this week's, in what happened this week, like $100 billion or $150 billion for state and local government revenue loss reimbursement. It didn't make it in. Essentially, the Democrats were pushing it, the Republicans weren't. So what happened this week was more money was put in the Paycheck Protection Plan, Act for small businesses, which the first phase was exhausted. And there's $100 billion, I think, for hospital reimbursements. They are still very much, and I'm lobbying Congress, and every other mayor and governor in this country is lobbying Congress to come up with a fourth appropriation for reimbursement of loss of revenue. There's not enough money in the universe to pay for it all, but what I think we're hoping for is some kind of allotment. We get funds from the federal government on formula basis for things like community development block grants, and if they would just apply that formula, so obviously the New Yorks and the Los Angeles get the most, and the very small cities get the least, and we would be the 39th largest allocation.
Is there any
for
indication
cities.
that there's a good chance of that?
I actually think there is, because I know for a fact that there may have been some issues among the Senate leadership, but the president has said, I think that's another phase. And, for example, Senator Gardner has, who's a Republican senator, has indicated to me his full support. And he says, I don't know any of my colleagues that wouldn't vote to help out state and local governments, because I think they understand they're the only ones that can borrow money. None of the rest of us can run a deficit. So we'll see what happens there.
Well, you talked about a little bit on the tourism side of things with some of the tough months that you've already seen in the numbers of how many people have been in hotels, record lows on the airport side of things. I know there's a lot of unknowns. You don't have a crystal ball, but looking forward to summer, which is usually such a hot tourism season, what do you foresee?
It's certainly going to start out slow. How do we know that? I think I don't think the final decision's been made, but I think there's a good chance the Broadmoor won't open until July 1st. Let me just make sure everybody understands Broadmoor is 1/3 of the lodging and rental tax and 1/3 of the hospital or the hotel motel produced sales tax. So June doesn't look very good. That's a big tourist month. I think things are going to get going slowly. Here's what I'm hoping, and we've got some pretty smart folks in the visitors business here, in the tourism business, and talked to Doug Price, and they're already doing their marketing, and they're changing the whole marketing approach. Hey, can't go to Europe this summer? Come to Colorado Springs, and let me show you how realistic that is. I was on a telephone conference today with a guy from Omaha. And he said last night at their dinner table, they informed their high school graduating senior that, sweetie, unfortunately, we were going to all go to Europe this summer. That's not going to happen. But we're willing to take a trip this summer within 1,000 miles. Where do you want to go? Guess what their choice was? Colorado Springs. And he was informing of that. And, of course, I couldn't resist the temptation to say, well, she's from Nebraska. Of course, anybody from Nebraska would want to go to Colorado.
But even if you were going to travel out of state and maybe you just want to go in state instead and you live in Fort Collins, come down to Colorado Springs. Same thing.
That's exactly right.
Whatever scale you need to.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
fit
So
your
that
budget.
and we got a couple things going in regard to that. We're about July 1st or so. We will be opening the one and only United States Olympic Museum and Hall of Fame. Let's go to Colorado Springs for the weekend and check out the new museum. So there's some things like that. I think you'll see a change in marketing. But let's not have any illusions that it won't be the type of summer that the last couple of summers have been in terms of tourism.
Hey, but if you're looking for somewhere, yes, we are better than Europe for people watching, and also the ultimate social distancing place to come for a trip. You can go outside and be able to nicely stay as we are right now, 6 feet away from each other.
Yeah, get out on parks and trails. Just one more thing before we go. We don't want to take up too much of your time, but I know that it's important to you. I would imagine just to give a thank you to essential workers out there. I know there's so many of them, and a lot of them work for the city.
There is so many. Let me start with our healthcare workers. Just incredible. I've been in contact with our hospitals every day. My first number I get every morning is, what's the hospital count? They think about it. They cleared out all their elective surgeries and elective stuff at great economic detriment to them to make sure that they were prepared for whatever happened with COVID. And then, of course, we got the workers themselves exposing themselves, out doing the testing and all that sort of thing. Then we've got essential workers in our food supply chains and all that sort of thing that have just done a tremendous job. We've been giving cookies to our trash guys and our mailmen and all that sort of thing that keep the wheels
But
turning.
those little gestures make a big difference.
Yeah, and let's talk about our city employees, our firefighters, our police officers are out there at risk. We greatly, and there was no stay at home for them, and we really appreciate that. We've had a lot of public works folks out there, code enforcement folks out there, and then I want to congratulate all the workers that stayed at home and did what they were asked to do, because they've been a big part of the pretty good picture that we've got in El Paso County right now. So there's tons and tons of people to thank. And there's tons and tons of people to say, please keep up the good work, because we're not out of the woods yet. We don't want to go backwards. We want to move forward. And that means for this next phase, make sure that you stay serious about this, because it's a real challenge. We're going to get through it. The other thing that's just been totally exemplified by this crisis is the American free enterprise system. The way that it has pivoted, one of the things we found out in this crisis is our supply chains, particularly our medical supply chains, are too dependent on other countries, including China, most particularly China. And it's been amazing to see the pivot, so that you've got, and right here in Colorado Springs, we've got companies that 2 months ago were making furniture, are making masks. We've got people that 2 months ago, their employees didn't know what a ventilator was, are now making ventilator parts. And that's happening all across the United States. And it's really remarkable. And if I can be so bold to think about, even after this is older, we've got a vaccine, things like that, what are some of the permanent things we're going to see? Number one, I think a lot of dinosaurs like myself, who've had a heck of a lot more Zoom meetings in the last couple of weeks
You're
than
high-tech
typical,
now.
are all of a sudden saying, well, this isn't so bad. So you'll probably see a lot more virtual meetings and things like that. What's going to happen to big box retail, which was suffering anyway? I think you're going to see, personally, massive consolidation. They're not going to go away. I want to try on a suit before I buy one and stuff like that. But I think you're going to see some adjustments there. But one of the big things that I alluded to earlier, I think, is these supply chains. And I wouldn't be surprised if, as part of this, you see a massive made in the USA type movement. Let's make sure that this very important medical equipment that we have to deal with these kinds of crises is made right here in the United States, so we don't have to worry about foreign supply chains.
Good points, and made here in Colorado Springs. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Any of these positive stories or thank yous that you want to share with us, we'd love for you to do that at behindthesprings@coloradosprings.gov. Feel free to send us an email. And we always want to remind you, too, to follow those credible sources. El Paso County Health is probably your best resource here locally. But, of course, El Paso County, the city, Colorado Springs Fire and Police, those are great accounts to follow on social media, for the latest information, Ted.
Yeah, and make sure that you're out there. We just want to thank our city workers, as Mayor just did, especially those on the front lines, CSPD, CSFD, and to the brave health care workers and so many other essential employees getting us all through this. We will bring you more conversations as often as possible. Again, we said this was a special edition of Behind the Springs. We're going to continue to bring you special editions, not doing our normal every other Tuesday where a new episode comes out. So make sure that you're subscribing
The
wherever
new
you.
normal, Ted.
Yes, this is the new normal as we're all learning through this pandemic. And I just want to give another appreciation to Mayor Suthers for coming by. I think I speak for a lot of employees when I say that we are under great leadership through this, and especially when you speak about all the financial aspects that are going into this. We know it keeps you up at night, and we all think that you're doing a great job. So With that, Jen, Mayor, do you have anything else that you'd like to say?
No, thanks for having me, and let's hang in there and get through this together. I think, as I've said many times now, if we do this right, when we get out of it, I think we can look back at it and probably, as a community, say this was one of our finest hours.
Well, on that note, this is another edition of Behind the Springs. Thank you for watching and listening.